Hi, and welcome to my Chapter 1 PowerPoint in our course Issues in Child Maltreatment. My name is Christina Collins. I am a longtime resident of Peshtigo, Wisconsin. I am currently a foster parent in Marinette County and have been since February of 2018. I recently took guardianship of my last foster kiddo, who was 14 and pregnant when she came to me. And I also have her son living in my home, who she retained custody of. We currently live, the three of us, with my boyfriend in Peshtigo, Wisconsin. I, for a career, support our special education staff, student services staff, which includes our counselors, school social workers, school psychologists, and our related services providers, our speech and language, physical therapists, and occupational therapists at our local school district. In this PowerPoint, we're going to go over 8 historical events and or laws that have impacted the child welfare system in the United States of America. Those 8 major historical events that I chose to kind of explain are: 1, the case of Mary Ellen Wilson; 2, the Battered Children Syndrome; 3, Indian Child Welfare Act; number 4, Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act of 1974; number 5, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment and Adoption Reform Act of 1978; 6, the Child Abuse Amendment of 1984; 7, Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act Amendment of 1989; and then finally, Child Abuse, Domestic Violence, Adoption, and Family Services Act of 1992. The first one we're going to go over is the case of Mary Ellen Wilson. This case marked the establishment of legal remedies for child abuse and the creation of the first Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Children in New York City in 1874. This movement really established non-governmental child protection organizations, and that's when they kind of started to spread throughout the country. This was the first reported real high-profile case of child abuse in the United States. Our second major event is the Battered Children Syndrome. In 1962, Dr. C. Henry Kemp published an article in the Journal of American Medical Association called the Battered Children Syndrome, which identified clinical evidence of non-accidental trauma causing injuries to children, usually caused by a parent or caregiver. Following this publication in 1967, every state, as well as the District of Columbia, enacted a form of reporting laws for child abuse and neglect to public agencies. A lot of times in this case, the explanations given for the injuries were improbable, or the stories of how the injuries developed didn't make sense. Many of the victims of Battered Children Syndrome were usually very young and often showed sign of chronic neglect, commonly seen in things such as malnutrition. Dr. Kemp brought to the light the magnitude of the problem of child abuse by giving physical child abuse a name and providing data on the prevalence and consequences of child battery. Following this article, it was like overnight that child abuse became a national issue. The next one we'll go over is the Indian Child Welfare Act. This was put into place in 1978 to help preserve the importance of the unique cultural and political beliefs of Native families. The Indian Child Welfare Act, also known as ICWA, was crafted to address some of the most long-standing and egregious removal practices specifically targeting Native children. Among its added protections for Native children, ICWA requires caseworkers to make several considerations when handling an ICWA case. And some of those considerations that they are talking about would be providing active efforts to the family, identifying a placement that fits under the ICWA preference provisions, notifies the child's tribe and the child's parent of the child custody proceedings, and they work actively to involve the child's tribe and the child's parents in all proceedings. The next one we'll go over is the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act of 1974. This bill was signed on January 31st, 1974. The Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act of 1974 became one of the first major federal government efforts to improve our nation's response to physical and sexual abuse and neglect. This marked the nation's first major step forward in addressing issues related to child maltreatment. Prior to this act, it was estimated that there were some 60,000 children who were reported to be abused each year. There was no systematic way to assess the true scope of the problem. Few states had structures in place to deal adequately with child maltreatment, and there really wasn't any consistency from state to state in dealing with child maltreatment. The Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment and Adoption Reform Act of 1978 requires all states to fund all child protection programs, increase training and technical assistance, define what sexual abuse is, and support grants to prevent, identify, and treat the sexual abuse of children. There were a few other additional requirements for NCCAN. And some of those requirements were to establish research priorities, distribute annual summaries of research on child maltreatment, training materials in the prevention, identification, and treatment of child abuse and neglect, prepare and submit a comprehensive plan to bring about maximum coordination of goals of all agencies with responsibilities with respect to child abuse and neglect to the Federal Advisory Board, and ensure that at least 3 of the members of the advisory board have a background in fields specific to child abuse and neglect. Child Abuse Amendment of 1984, also called the Baby Doe Amendment. This required states to have in place procedures with state protective systems to respond to the reporting of medical neglect, including instances of withholding medically indicated treatment for disabled infants with life-threatening conditions. The development of regulations and training and technical support or assistance established by the Health and Human Services for care providers to carry out the provisions of this act. Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act Amendment of 1989. This amendment establishes the Emergency Child Abuse Prevention Services Grant, was administered by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, and made states and local agencies responsible for or with experience in providing abuse prevention services were eligible for grants to improve the delivery of services for children whose parents were substance abusers. Child Abuse, Domestic Violence, Adoption, and Family Services Act of 1992. Through this act, community-based child abuse and neglect prevention grants provided assistance to states in supporting activities for the prevention of child abuse and neglect. Research and assistance activities provisions included cultural distinction relating to child abuse and neglect, culturally sensitive procedures in respect to child abuse cases, and the relationship of child abuse and neglect to cultural diversity. In conclusion of my research of the laws and laws related to the establishment and prevention of child abuse and neglect, I was surprised to see how quote-unquote new these laws were. Until this assignment, I thought that there had been laws in place for the protection of children in the United States for many, many years. While I believe we still have a long way to go to establish laws and guidelines to protect every child, these laws have laid an amazing groundwork for the child protection workers, doctors, and mandated reporters, among others, who serve and protect our children. it was very eye-opening for me, especially as a foster parent, to see that some of these and a lot of these laws really have happened within my lifetime, and that prior to that there probably wasn't a lot in place to protect children from abuse, neglect, sexual abuse. So it's amazing to see the groundwork that's been laid for hopefully some more future laws and regulations to come. And the references, these are the references used for this project. Thank you for watching.